Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests. I am Sarah Al-Hamli, a diplomat trainee at ACDA, and it's my great pleasure to extend my warm welcome to you all. Today, we gather under the banner of profound exploration and critical discourse. Our session, titled Middle East, Rethinking the Quest for Security, offers a twofold objective. Firstly, we aim to explore and analyze the notions of security dynamics within the Middle East, not just from a geopolitical standpoint, but from the perspective of those whose lives are directly affected. We will examine challenges, understand emerging threats, and seek collaborative solutions that put human well-being and dignity at first. Secondly, we aim to redefine security models in the region through innovative pathways. Given the evolving geopolitical landscapes and global challenges, security must adopt a reliable and adaptive approach that reflects the aspirations and concerns of individuals and communities. In these discussions, by emphasizing the human stories behind the statistics and local impacts of global decisions, we hope to foster a more inclusive and empathetic understanding of security. Together, let's work toward a future defined by peace, stability, and prosperity for all. With that, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce our panelists. His Excellency Nickolay Mladenov, Director General at ACDA, Her Excellency Ambassador Nabeela Al-Mulla, Distinguished Lecturer at American University of Kuwait, His Excellency Vog Yaramich, President of Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development, who gathered here to share valuable insights during today's discussion, moderated by our very own Dr. Khalifa Al-Suwaidi, Research Fellow at ACDA. Dr. Al-Suwaidi, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Sarah. First off, it's quite the turnout, so thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us in this, on this wonderful occasion. It is a timely discussion to have, of course, and I'm joined by, panelists whose stellar careers are to be aspired to say the least. I'd like to kick off with Her Excellency Ambassador Nabeela Al-Mulla, and I'd like to ask you about your recent publication for the Horizons magazine, in which you described the quest for peace as being elusive. And obviously you've used the unfolding tragedy in Gaza as a case study. Would you say, Your Excellency, that the Global South has lost faith in the so-called rules-based order?
I'm not so good with technology. You know, I always ask the kids around me, please come and help me, your auntie is helpless, you know. When I used the word elusive, I indicated it in reference to the very origin of the جني بوش مع هذا مع التكنولوجيا. So it's really, my use of the word elusive is that in reference to the founders of the United Nations, because the original history of the Palestinian people was there since 1948, and the UN had been adamant to try to trace it, to find the solution for it. And I take it from the time of the assassination of Count Bernadotte, the Swedish intermediary assigned by the Secretary General to find a solution, to our time now. And it eluded the founders. 1945, when the United Nations was established. We were not members of the United Nations at the time, but we make do with what we have, and that is organizations that are at our disposal, and we have no other. I know that His Royal Highness Prince Turkey referred to it as a system that has to be overhauled. But we make do with what we have now, and we try to overhaul it so that it will answer to the problems and to dissolve them now. With the issue that we have now at hand, and we've always had that, the question is not only of Gaza, it's a question of the Palestinians deprived of their homes, of their property, of their rights to nationhood, and we have to follow that. The most immediate thing now is that of Gaza. But I always say, okay, but add to it also the situation in the occupied territories, the situation of the Palestinians inside of Israel. And that would lead me to the ultimate question, and that is, what's our aim? Ultimately, the two-state solution in that area for both Israelis and Palestinians. Meanwhile, we have to find solution for the current solution of the famine, the misery that is visited on the Gazans as well as the Palestinians in the West. And may I say that the latest that I heard, even today, something that was heartbreaking is what happened to the pier that was supposed to be like a Band-Aid to assist in the supply to Gaza, that it is submerged. No, but these are piecemeal solutions. We have to find some that will be stand on its feet, that will answer to the rule of law, that will answer to the aspirations of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I can't think of a more eloquent answer. You've summed it up quite brilliantly, and I say that that the road to sustainable peace requires a political will, basically, on behalf on the great powers, if I may say, and also on top of that, the states that are emerging and are starting to play a more proactive role in terms of shaping global affairs. With that in mind, I'd like to pass to basically to His Excellency Mr. Yeremich, and drawing on his broad experience, as a seasoned diplomat and a critical thinker. You're the president of the Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development. Now, at the heart of the center's founding lies this philosophy of finding a way forward in terms of, bringing about sustainable development and ensuring that there is, progressive governance globally. So would you please walk us through the philosophy of your center and how it relates to the broader theme of today's talk?
Well, thank you very much for this truly easy question, given that we're here to discuss certain things that are far more difficult. But I'd like first and foremost to thank my dear friend, His Excellency Nickolay Mladenov, for inviting me here and for being together with Ambassador Mulla, contributors to the newest issue of the magazine that my think tank is publishing, that I'll invite you to take a look at, which was on the Middle East. And I could not think of a better place to launch this issue than one of the most prestigious academic institutions here in the Gulf and beyond, the Diplomatic Academy of Abu Dhabi. So I thank you for your hospitality. It's great to be back in Abu Dhabi. I was here as foreign minister. I was here as president of the General Assembly. But at a time when we were setting up the Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development, things were really different in the world. The world was going through a very positive phase when it comes to multilateral diplomacy. And now the times are very different. I am of the opinion that geopolitics is much like economy in terms that it is cyclical. The only difference is that cycles in geopolitics, they tend to last much longer. In economy, it's a few years, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. In geopolitics, I'm afraid it is decades. And we are right now living through a period of geopolitical recession that's going to stay with us for a while. And coming out of this geopolitical recession, in my opinion, essentially is going to require solving of a three-body problem. And for those of you who haven't read the book or watched the Netflix series, three-body problem is essentially an unsolvable problem, at least not solvable by analytical means. The three bodies in this big geopolitical game being the United States, obviously, the most powerful actor in the world, China, and Russia. So solving the three-body problem, or partially solving the three-body problem, is going to be first and foremost reflected in three important theaters. One should look in the three theaters of this year, and this is actually what my center is concentrating on this year. Number one, the war in the Middle East, and our center is now devoted to this, and the newest issue is devoted to this. Number two, the continuation of the war in Ukraine. And number three, in my opinion, perhaps the most consequential of all, which is American elections that are coming at the end of this year. So those three things, the war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, and American elections, I think the historians of the future will be looking back at the 2024, considering first and foremost those three topics. When it comes to the war in Ukraine, I think that things are becoming more and more clear as to how this might end. When it comes to the Middle East, I think it is the opposite. But I wouldn't dare presenting myself as an expert on the Middle East in the presence of these people on the stage. I'm just like an observer. I like following the Middle East. I am not an expert on the Middle East. And then when it comes to American elections, I think that it is also becoming clearer and clearer how this is going to end in the end. But between now and that ending, there can be so many developments that can influence what is going on in the world, and in particular in those two other theaters that I mentioned to you. I'd like to stop here for now.
Well, very well said, Your Excellency, and it shows, it paints a picture as to how, inseparably intertwined, let's say, our destinies are, irrespective of our, differences in terms of faith, nationality, and so on and so forth. Your Excellency, very well put as well regarding the state of the sort of political mindset in the West and mainly in America, and how that might have, severe implications, let's say, on the future of Americans involved in the world or beyond. And with that, of course, at ACDA, we pride ourselves on having this sort of global outlook. And of course, His Excellency Nickolay Mladenov, of course, is an embodiment of this as the person at the helm. So, Your Excellency, I'd like to ask you about something that's timely, of course, which is the war in Gaza. And mindful of the points that were basically touched upon by our esteemed panelists, how has the war in Gaza impacted upon efforts to build a cohesive and formidable, let's say, diplomatic front?
Thank you, Khalifa, and thank you to our panelists today. I'm very happy to welcome Vuk here to Abu Dhabi. He and I have been friends since we were both ministers, and then in the UN together we had far less white hair back then. We used to be considered some of the youngest ministers around, a title we no longer can claim. But it's good to have this discussion because I think it's an interesting perspective to talk about the Gulf and the Arab world when you have two people who come from the Balkans. A region that for 100 years has waged at least 5 wars, if not more, as was endemic a narrative for conflict, for insolvable conflicts. Sadly, a title that has been taken over now by the Middle East. And I think, to your question, the situation in Gaza has aptly reminded everyone that whatever efforts you make to build an independent region, Arab world, which stands on its own 2 feet, all of these efforts will be hampered if the conflicts that have been plaguing the region for a long time are not resolved. Despite the best willingness to very large parts of the, I believe, Arab population and Arab leadership to move forward, these conflicts, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, for example, being one of them, but not the only one, need to be addressed. And what we find today is that, you know, in a world in which we face fragmentation everywhere, at the multinational level, multilateral level, you talked about that. Even at the national level, societies are far more divided today than they were before. We need to see a force that actually goes back to stitching up, if I can use that term, the international system. And what we face today, unfortunately, in Gaza is the lack of a comprehensive framework that can deal with the conflict. We know the outcome that needs to be achieved. Two-state solution, which is the only sustainable basis for resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We know the roadmap to get there, which is peaceful negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians based on UN Security Council resolutions, international legitimacy, etc. But we see also the obstacles to that. And the obstacles are both in Israel and in the Palestinian community. And these obstacles need to be overcome. And to be overcome, they need the assistance of the international community. In the past, there were efforts where you would have, you know, the United States, Russia, the European Union, the UN as part of the quartet. We don't have that mechanism now. Everything ends up in the Security Council, where it gets blocked and becomes very politicized. And what we actually need is a much more concerted, structured effort to address the difficulties that both Israelis and Palestinians face on the way forward. But of course, all of that needs to start somewhere else. And it needs to start with the ending of the fighting in Gaza, with a ceasefire, with a permanent ceasefire that allows reconstruction to begin, that allows a legitimate mechanism for Gaza's governance to emerge within the Palestinian political framework, and to allow for a reformed Palestinian Authority that can bring a dialogue forward. To that end, I think, you know, it in a strange way, it exemplifies exactly this fragmentation that we face today, that everybody looks at the situation from their own perspective, and it's very difficult to construct a joint effort. It is doable. It is not undoable, but it needs far more effort than it was in the past. Sorry if it's not a very optimistic answer to your question.
No, that's exactly the answer I was looking for, so thanks, Your Excellency. I mean, it's important to paint a realistic picture as well. So, you know, being a realist is something, you know, that is sort of recommended in these basically testing times. Your Excellency, following up on you know, His Excellency's remarks, I wanted to ask you regarding the sort of this crisis of faith in basically international bodies, the global-based order. Sure, it kind of casts our minds once again back to the points you've made earlier, and you know, can we sort of bridge the gap in the sense, is this symptomatic of a lack of political will on behalf of big powers, or is it basically a crisis whereby, you know, smaller states, or let's say these new blocs that are emerging, are basically, you know, negating the role of you know, the UN or the Security Council in terms of, you know, the making of the global order, or is it something else beneath that sort of surface?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I will take off from where you mentioned. We have to address, first of all, the immediate. And the immediate thing is to help the people under siege in Gaza, you know, with aid and whatnot. On a parallel track, we have to put our faith in the rule of law. Now, we have judgments. Let the ICC be kept aside, but I'll go to the ICJ. ICJ's rulings have to be implemented. And I think it behoves all member states to bring the judgments of the decision of the ICJ to be implemented. And I would love to see the day when a group of countries, and I would love to see a combination of different regions, West, East, South, you know, to bring the issue forward to the Security Council. We welcomed the attitude of the European Union. I think it was quite a principled one, although they were dragging their feet in the beginning. But this is extremely important. And I have faith in the world community, but because I look at it this way, why would South Africa take it upon itself to bring the issue forward? But because we are in this humanity together. And I think they did it out of a very, very deep belief. And I trust, because I've been ambassador to South Africa and I knew their sufferings, I followed in their struggle. And they are very sincere in looking for ways to resolve questions, you know, on the international scene. I wouldn't say take it through institutions like BRICS, not necessarily. I would call it the coalition of the willing, but not in the Western sense, not in the American sense, hasha. You know, the willing among nations on this earth to come together and solve the questions. The immediate, we have that. We have to embolden, we have to support UNRWA and all of the countries. I really welcome some of the Western countries coming to their senses after their irrational behavior when they announced they were boycotting the budget. Welcoming the increased role for UNRWA, not only in Gaza, but all over. You look at them, what they have done. This is an organization that was there since 1948, and I think the next time that there will be a revisit in the General Assembly will be in 2026. Embolden this organization. Don't let it be at the mercy and the whim of a fleeting policymakers making threats right and left. These are institutions we need within the bigger one, which is called the United Nations. Embolden the ICJ. We have to work there. We cannot go around. We don't have time to create new organizations. What we have time to is to bring countries together who believe in that. And not necessarily, maybe you don't have to look at governments. Look at the civil society, what is prevalent all over the place. And maybe we can do that. But let's regain our faith in this world. We don't have any other. And we don't have other organizations. Where do you want to go? Thank you.
That's a fascinating account. Once again, Your Excellency, I mean, it's you know, a joy to listen to you even on the sidelines as you recount, you know, and share your anecdotes, you know, with us. Your Excellency, Mr. Yeremich, I wanted to ask you regarding the domestic scene. You know, if you could just shed light in parts of the Western world, given that you're also operating in New York, and obviously the political landscape is changing, of course, in anticipation of, you know, of course, the upcoming U.S. presidential elections. But there are also events that are basically, you know, that prove to be consequential to global peace and global order. One of which that comes to mind is the upcoming European elections. So with that in mind, how would you sort of, you know, basically explain or let's say account for those possible changes that may occur as a result of, you know, the outcome of said elections?
Well, thanks for this question, and I understand there is a great diplomatic crowd here, including diplomatic representatives from Europe. So I'm going to choose my words very carefully when I talk about elections. I don't think that European elections are really amongst the top 3 priorities. I have people in New York, in UN, talking about, well, in New York, definitely, but I'm talking about the UN. because I just spent 3 weeks at the UN doing something special related to the Balkans. So I did actually talk to maybe 40 or 50 permanent representatives of various countries. And basically all our conversations, and I started off with, talking about the Balkans, but then we ended up talking about other things, but all the conversations ended, and that took up most of our time with the current war in Gaza. This is number one, and number two, and number three, if you will, topic of interest of people representing their countries in essentially what is still the only universal multilateral body, political body that we have, that is the United Nations. And all the discussions are about a solution. What is the solution to this? And it's a very complicated, as we all know, problem. I'll tell you what is my take. I'll try and be analytical. I'm not an expert, as I said. I'm not an expert in the Middle East, so I'm just trying to be an observer, as educated as possible, an observer, right? Essentially, there can be no solution. There can be a one-state solution, and there can be a two-state solution. I did not hear any other thing on the menu. No solution was actually something that a lot of people have been championing for many, many years. Sugarcoating it, calling it different names, but essentially no solution was the main show in town for a long time. And then came October 7, tragedy. Now, everything that has happened in between is an even greater tragedy. That is occupying everybody's mind, as I said, in the UN. I personally think that no solution is no longer an option. Because if we stick to the no solution, there's going to be an even more tragedy, untold tragedy, that the people of Gaza are going through. I think we're almost sure, it's going to be almost certain that we're going to have the expansion of the war in the coming months, one way or another. Maybe the expansion of the war was successfully avoided in April. I'm talking about Iran and Israel clash. I'm not sure if those things will be so easily controllable in the future if there is a continuation of a no solution. Number three, I think that there could be another expressions of anger like it was on October 7, but with those deplorable acts happening perhaps elsewhere in the world, in Europe, for instance. And number four, why I think that this is not an option or should not be an option, is that America, which is still the most consequential player in our world in so many ways, is right now suffering through a precipitous fall of image in the UN. I'm talking about the UN as a result of this ongoing thing. And I think that I don't know who's going to be president of America. I know where I would place my bet, but we still don't know who's going to lead the American administration as of 2025. But the new American administration is going to face with this reality that the ongoing of the no solution, which means war, is having very, very negative effect on America's standing in the world. So I don't think that no solution is an option. Then we come to the one-state solution. The one-state solution could be that there's a democratic state of Israel from the river to the sea, democratic state of Israel, which will have about 7 million Jews and about 7 million Palestinians, roughly. Well, that democratic state would no longer be a Jewish state, and therefore I don't think this is something that Israel is going to be ready to accept, no matter who is in government in Israel in the future. Or it could be a completely non-democratic state, and Ambassador Al-Mulla was mentioning South Africa. South Africa did go through a stage in its history where it was not a democratic state, so a lot of people are making parallels between that time and what we currently have in the Holy Land. I'd be careful with making parallels. There may be some, but things are also different, right? But it could be then a non-democratic state. I don't think if this is a good option that we should be ready to embrace. Or it could be a state without Palestinians, which I think should be an abominable outcome that the whole world must make sure it does not happen. So one state would mean either Israel not being Jewish, or not being democratic, or being without Palestinians. I don't think that either of those three is acceptable. Some for Israelis and others for the rest of the world. So therefore, this leaves us with a two-state solution, and we have discussed it so many decades, the two-state solution this way or that way. It has been elusive all these years until now, but if you objectively, analytically put things on the table, and if you are hoping for world peace and not like a world war, I think that we will have to come to agreement that that must happen, and hopefully before the next act of terrorism occurs somewhere in the world, or that the war expands in ways in which then Balkans lessons of, especially the Balkans lessons of 1914, can come to mind as a stark reminder.
Thank you once again, Your Excellency. I agree regarding something that you've mentioned on the on understanding the nuances, you know, and being able to sort of immerse oneself in a context, you know, in that case being sadly a conflict, to understand basically the differences, you know, that sort of you know at times may prove to be you know, hurdles on our quest for peace. But therein, I think, lies the opportunity for, you know, think tanks or institutions like our institution here at ACDA to forge ahead with a progressive kind of vision for global peace. And you know, Your Excellency, you know, it's going to be a rather you know, arduous task to answer the following question, but you know, what role does ACDA sort of, and similar institutions, if I may, our strategic partners and all that, play in that sort of, you know, on that front? How are we able to not only basically carve out a vision, a progressive vision for the future, but also, you know, involve our key stakeholders, and also, dare I say, also, you know, our students and those who benefit from the academy to embody the same mindset?
Before I answer your question, can I just follow up on something that Vuk was saying? Because I think if you really focus on the situation in Gaza, you need to not only focus on the situation in Gaza, you need to focus very much also on the situation in the West Bank. And to frame it in the following way. One, I think everybody agrees, in Israel and beyond, that the separation of Israelis and Palestinians in two states is the only thing that can guarantee a sustainable peace between the two peoples. Secondly, the right of the Jewish people to have a state does not negate the right of the Palestinian people to have a state, and vice versa. And this is the very fundamental belief on which we need to base any proposal for how to resolve the conflict. Both peoples, point number 3, have the legitimate, historic, national, religious, you name it, right to be present in that land, which they call their own, and to live in peace and security and prosperity. Now, the options from there are one, which, you know, Vuk called the non-resolution of the conflict, the one-state reality of perpetual occupation, which you have now, which varies in the West Bank and Gaza in different ways, that's the reality which you can have now. And you can have it, unfortunately, for a very, very long time. With great pain to both peoples, for a very long time, that can continue. And it will bleed, and it will become at a very high cost. If we want to find a way out of it, we need to reframe the entire conversation into why the legitimate right of both peoples to have a state and their legitimate presence in that land allows the international community to frame a process that delivers statehood to the Palestinians, that delivers peace and security to Israel. And here, to answer your question, I think, it's not just institutions and think tanks in the Arab world and the Gulf that need to be creative in their thinking, but it is the countries in the Gulf that actually can play a very crucial role. Because we live in a time in which there is enough space for political pronouncements and declarations, but there's also enough space for quiet diplomacy and engagement. And what the Gulf countries have in different ways proven is that they have that capacity to bring to the table a different negotiating style, a different approach to mediation from what has been prevalent in the last number of decades. That might actually be very useful in situations like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Because, Gulf countries, whether it's Kuwait or the UAE or Oman or Qatar, it doesn't matter, all are known for their discretion, for their ability to work over long periods of time, to think through processes that require long-term relationships and engagements. I mean, just think about Oman, which in the 1980s almost sided with Iraq against Iran, and the United States had to mediate to prevent that from happening. It was Oman that had to help the United States mediate with Iran for the JCPOA. You have Qatar engaging in very high stakes negotiations with Hamas and the Taliban. You have the UAE, which has developed this brand of consensus building. There's a whole new approach here in the Gulf that needs to be brought into. And I think a partnership between the countries in the Gulf today and more traditional players and the United Nations, because we always need to bring it back to the United Nations. That is the key question. We always need to bring it back to the United Nations because that provides the legitimate international framework for conflict resolution. Perhaps that is where, that is part of the formula of what needs to be done. And ACDA and other institutions in the region can bring in that innovative thinking, that new approach to how we look at conflict resolution or how we look at specific situations that I think can be quite valuable. And one of the most interesting platforms I think emerging now in the Gulf is what came out of the GCC recent declaration on peace and security, which was adopted, because that provides also for a track 2 engagement between institutions in Kuwait and Saudi and the rest of the Gulf to actually come together and think through ideas of how the GCC as an organization and the countries individually can be helpful.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I think this is a perfect transition to the next question that I wanted to ask Your Excellency regarding the role of track 2 diplomacy as well, and also, if I may add, to His Excellency's point, the point on quiet diplomacy and discreet diplomacy. I think Kuwait has emerged, at least not only in the Gulf but also internationally as well, as one of the kind of mediators. But as there being a sense of it's this sort of state that always looks for reconciliation, measures of peace, and all that. And I'd like you to shed further light on that, of course, by drawing on your expertise, and as well, if you may, as well as you're a distinguished lecturer at at a like-minded institution, would you share anecdotes with our perhaps our student diplomats here who are basically very keen on listening and hearing from you.
Thank you. I'm afraid to say anything because I have a minder here. I have one of my students from AUK, and I want her to promise me that she would not relay what I'm saying now to the rest of you. But anyway, no, I gladly, I tell you. Mediation I think that all of our countries in the GCC had been known to have been active in one way or another. We have been doing it quite a lot when it comes to even, I remember in my career being involved with the Iran-Iraq war, and we tried our mediation, only to be rebuffed by one or the other. We tried our mediation in other circumstances. Oman did. We try our best. Saudi Arabia did when the question of Sudan and whatnot. We tried. We're still trying with the question of Yemen. But there is not a wholesome GCC chart to tackle these issues. It's probably on a bilateral basis. And that is a welcome thing because it's really incremental. One helps the other. And as I was thinking, listening to both of you talking about the role of others like think tanks, and I was intrigued with the outflow of some, it's not exactly an extreme, but those who believe in living together, the Jews, Muslims, Christians, whatever it is, whether it is in Israel or in our own countries. And I think quite a number of them should be encouraged and empowered to speak out, especially those who are inside Israel. Empower them, give them a forum, because their voice is great to be heard. And we don't hear about them much. They are mostly among some friends, I share that and stuff like that. We need people like that to build on the sense of harmony in society. You can have solutions planted by governments, policies, resolutions, but you need to prepare the society itself to accept these situations. And we've heard lots of stories where Jews or Israelis helping Palestinians, and we need to encourage that more and more. And from there, I think we have to stress on the importance of continuing this quiet diplomacy without fanfare. Thank you.
I think it's a key point there that you've mentioned regarding, fostering that sense of cohesion amongst or between, religious communities. For there to be let's say, even to practitioners, a framework with which they can basically build upon and forge ahead. And I think with that, these incremental steps, and I think you mentioned the word incremental, which is, I think, sums it up very, very, very well. Your Excellency, Mr. Yeremich, I think on the point of incremental steps, I always think that incremental steps sort of are needed. And they often, in most cases, precede that sort of leap forward. I wouldn't say a monumental leap, but some sort of progress. Would you agree on that sentiment, or do we need sort of ready-made, at times hastily implemented solutions to problems?
Very good question. And I want to commend Ambassador Mulla's way of really being very diplomatic about these very, very difficult things. She's a born diplomat, and Nicky's he's the dean. He's our host here, so he has to be, of course, very proper, very diplomatic, because he's the host. And I'm just a professor, not here. I'm a professor of international relations, nothing more than that. Right now, I'm teaching at Sciences Po, and I feel perhaps a little bit more free to to talk about concrete and practical things, including, say, incremental, right? Yes, the first incremental thing would definitely be to stop the most terrible tragedy of our lifetime that has been happening, well, maybe not of our lifetime, but like of the last 10 years. This is the biggest tragedy that's happening in the world. Got to come to a pause somehow. So the first incremental step, the mother of all incremental steps, would have to be to stop the killing, deprivation of the people, of the million or so people in Gaza. And that's, I mean, any other steps, you know, beyond that would be either far too theoretical or far too hypocritical, in my opinion. But then there are other incremental steps that come after, say, truce, one way or another. And the key actors, of course, are the government of Israel, currently led by Prime Minister Netanyahu, Hamas, and the PA. And I really find it very, very hard to envisage that particular setup of actors in their current shape and form coming to an agreement on incremental or less incremental way out of this tragedy towards something stable. I don't think that in the future of the two-state solution, which I believe is the only way forward, could be a role for Hamas. I don't see the current PA being capable of implementing a two-state solution to the benefit and liking, first and foremost, of the Palestinian people, but also the rest of the region and international community. And I'd be enormously surprised if a party to the peace is going to be Prime Minister Netanyahu's government of Israel. Perhaps another government of Israel, yes, but Prime Minister Netanyahu's government of Israel, I'd be very, very surprised to see this materialize in the near or far future.
Thank you once again, Your Excellency, and I think this is an important point that you made there to situate that sort of discussion in a sort of, let's say, timely context and reflect, so to an extent, the state of affairs, at least in Israel. Given that we were basically tasked once again with this big sort of responsibility, or let's say to rethink or come up with ways to rethink the peace formula, if you may. How would you, Your Excellency, Nickolay Mladenov, go about this sort of problematic exercise of having to navigate, these troubled waters in your quest to rethink peace, at least? Well, it's in the name, the Middle East.
Well, I would say, first of all, it starts at home, and that is that the countries in the Middle East need to continue their policy of becoming more self-reliant and self-assured of their ability to lead their own security and their own foreign policy. Secondly, it requires the ability to be able to speak to all sides and to engage with everyone. I remember a time in which we were negotiating the previous Gaza ceasefire, which unfortunately collapsed on October 7th last year in the tragedy. But at that point, it was a weird experience for me as the UN person on the ground, because it was a time in which the Palestinians from Hamas and Fatah would not talk to each other. The Israelis would not talk to the Palestinians. The Egyptians would not talk to the Qataris. The Americans would not talk to the Palestinians. There were too many people around the room not talking to each other. And yours truly and a few others were left in the middle as the only people who were able to actually talk to everyone. And I think that ability to be able to talk to everyone is critical for the stability and the future of the region, the Gulf, and beyond. Thirdly, I think it's important to look at what is the, and I keep going back to this word, the architecture that allows the countries in the region, in the Middle East, to have mechanisms that reduce tensions and resolve conflicts before they escalate to the point at which they become kinetic or become unresolvable. And if you start with these three elements, I think you will find that the power of this region is carries far more weight, both in terms of conflict resolution, but also in terms of impact on the international field than it currently does when you have individual states taking forward their national agendas. And in that sense, I think this requires a different mindset, which is already starting to take place in the region. It needs to be perhaps strengthened and encouraged, because it is also vital to preserve, and I keep going back to this point, to the ambassador's point from the beginning, is that in a world which is falling apart, in a multilateral system that is falling apart, it is exactly middle powers and small states that have a responsibility more than others, in a way, to stitch it back together, to rebuild the links that are necessary to strengthen multilateralism. And what better way to strengthen multilateralism if not by engaging with the United Nations, if not strengthening your relationships with your neighbors, and if not strengthening your own capacity to contribute in a positive way. I know this sounds maybe a bit too theoretical and far-fetched, given where we are, but I hope that it is some attempt to answer the big question of rethinking the quest for security in the Middle East. Because if we keep looking only at tactical solutions, we will always be faced with the strategic problems that will never find their own resolution. I'm hopeful that we're making some progress on having a much more strategic approach as to the future of the region.
Your Excellency, just picking up on that point that His Excellency Mr. Mladenov put forward. How do you see the role of, or how do you envisage a world in which small states play a more proactive role in shaping global affairs or reviving, let's say, multilateralism? Excellency?
I went far, thinking of who shall I call when I'm in trouble, Shall I call on South Africa? Shall I call on India? Should I call on Brazil? All these BRICS countries? No, I will call on my own. My country is my neighborhood, And I would ask them to use their good relationship with whoever, with all the other powers, to bring them together, to cluster around. As I said, I'm using the term whimsically, the coalition of the willing. But it's a beautiful expression, but I hesitate to use it because it's ascribed to our friend, the Americans. And I think that comes from the Americans. Sometimes you say, oh no, please, because if you're associated with them, people have second thoughts. And it is not fair to our American partners. But coalition of the willing among the medium power states. And you know what? I don't know if I'm going a little bit out of my depth today, how gratified I was to witness at the beginning, before we came to this hall, the signing ceremony of the collaboration between ACDA and CISRD. It's, I think, one of the examples of how a country from the north is collaborating with the south. This is the kind of bridges that we have to build. Let's build more bridges like that. Let's go further. Let's build bridges with think tanks in South Africa, for example. I'm biased, by the way, for South Africa, but don't ask me why, you know. But it's things of the sort. These countries seem to be out of hand. Why are they? They're not. With Singapore, with Malaysia, why are we not successful in bringing in India, for example? Thinking of it loud, and I don't mean any insult to anyone, but how come that I don't hear much about Indian inroads towards resolving this conflict? India is one of us. From a subcontinent, is right across. How come? Are they oblivious? Are they too involved with their elections, building their power bases and things like that? Why? How come that we don't hear of the Philippines, for example, coming in? How come that Japan, so quick with the Anwar cutting the... why is that so? Don't we have enough inroads? Don't we have friends around, mediators to talk with them, to bring them together? This is our job. This is the job of not only think tanks, but I think primarily diplomatic envoys, you know, to speak out and say, why are you absent from the scene? It reminds me of an old movie, say, what did you do in the war, Daddy? Did you just watch it on TV? Did you bring any kind of a peaceful solution? Did you put a penny to help the Red Crescent, to help with whatever it is? Did you draw a sort of a caricature that will endear people to your suffering, whether you are in Israel or you are in the occupied territories and whatnot? Whether you are in Jordan, are we oblivious to what is happening to the Palestinian camps in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan? Let us not forget the overall picture. You know, للأسف إنه ينخر فينا. Our division also is not healthy. We have to work holistically. We have to help every single way, whether it is in the midst of us or far away, whether it's at New York in the United Nations, whether it is in Belgrade, whether it's in Pretoria. Let's do our bit wherever we are. Add our voice, you know. Let us not make it ceremonial. We come at one kind of event and we say, okay, well said. Let's do something about it. And I believe that there is enough humanity left in all of us. Whether you are active, you're professional, you're an official, you're a diplomat, whatever, every single one of us counts. Let us do something. The state of the world cannot take it. And I'm not talking only about the Palestinian question. And when I started to write that article book, I was wondering, where shall I start? You know, the Korean question was also as old as 1940s. Palestinian question was 1940s, you know. So all these questions have been with us. Do we alter the system? Let's amend it. And we saw how, ironically, the United States changed its position when it came about the right of veto. When it came to the question of Ukraine, they relented and followed the flow of the majority of countries that wanted the question to be discussed from Security Council, taking it to the General Assembly. Pressure like that, continue with that. You know, one voice, it's again incremental, one voice over another, over another, over another. And it has to do with many of the issues we're facing in this world. It has, you know, and, you know, allow me if I digress a little bit, Dr. Khalifa, but, you know, it pains me sometimes that when we make inroads in one area, we forget that we left something behind. Today I was listening about what is happening in the World Health Organization. What happened to us? We thought that we're getting together to fight epidemics, pandemics, Even pandemics, we cannot get together. Allah, what happened to our humanity? We're becoming inhuman. We cannot share vaccines. We cannot share financial resources. We cannot allow, countries to partake of our scientific know-how. Give a little bit. You want the world to be help itself? Give them the freedom. Give them the patent rights. Allow them. Bring them in. This kind of hegemony by centers of power, centers of excellence, as they say, cannot go on. We cannot live in our world without opening up, sharing with others who are willing to help themselves and helping international institutions and other societies. Forgive me, Dr. Khalifa.
No, you're absolutely forgiven, Your Excellency. That was as heartfelt and as as moving as one would imagine. Your Excellency, Mr. Yeremich, any thoughts basically on the points that Her Excellency had just sort of very, very conclusively and so let's say in a way very, very eloquently argued for?
Most of it was really music for my ears. I'm a big believer in the increasing role of the global South on the international scene, and you mentioned a number of countries. Why not this? Why not India? Why not? I'd add to this list China. I think that China has already become a very significant actor, and obviously here in the Middle East prior to the tragedy of October 7, there was an important role that China played in helping re-normalize diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I think China is going to continue being an actor in this regard, but essentially it'll have to be regional ownership of what will come in Palestine and Israel in the coming, I hope, months and not years. Because if we are in the business of years, as I said, I am afraid that we're going to go through something far more tragic than what we have seen so far, and not just in this region. Again, back to the two-state solution. I don't envisage, at least not in the near future, the state of Palestine with its own military and security. I think it'll be a very far-fetched to imagine under the circumstances. So somebody else would have to jump in to provide this. And who better than the region? Who better than the region? Supported by one or two external actors, which are going to continue being essential in that field. I could elaborate on this a little bit more, but since I understand we also need to get some questions from the audience, I'll stop there.
Yes, of course, Your Excellency. I mean, thank you for that. The discussion itself, is basically can drag on for days, and this is not an understatement. So with that in mind, I'd like to sort of invite our, dear attendees to ask any questions that they may have. Please feel free. Raise your hand, and the mic will make its way to you. تفضل سلطان.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Dr. Khalifa, and thank you, Your Excellencies, for a passionate discussion that gave these issues that deserved weight. I'd like to answer the last remark Her Excellency Ambassador Nabeela said. I don't think anyone is oblivious. I think we have the technologies that gave everyone a clear picture of what is going on, and thank God for that. It's different than the old times. And I think this gives us a new thought, which is the new generation that's coming, whether they are in Palestine and Israel and the rest of the world, they have a good understanding of what is going on. And I think they will face these issues in the future. They need to have a say on what is going on. And I think they deserve it, as they need to have their own voice. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello, everyone. My question is to the panel in general, and whoever wants to kind of answer it can answer it. See, throughout this very engaging conversation, we have heard that the United Nations is the only mechanism, and it has been reiterated again and again and again and again. See, my issue is that we know how the League of Nations ended, and that is purely because of the shift of power and bias and so on and so on. And as His Excellency Nickolay said, in the Security Council, we are facing some kind of vetoing and some blockage to what we try to do within the region. Don't you think that it is very imperative and important for us to actually establish our own powers within the Middle East and on the Asian region? In a sense, the Western world has the European Union, they have NATO as a militarized force. Don't you think that we kind of need something like that within the Asian region, let alone just the Middle Eastern region as well, for security reasons as well?
We'll take one more from... Yeah, please.
Thank you. I have heard that India has been mentioned many times here. And since I have worked for India's Middle East role for many years, I think, let me just tell you my own sentiments, how India looks at the whole thing. One biggest manifestation of India's effort has been India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. The other manifestation of its involvement has been I2U2. There are other forums India has been working, but what His Excellency Yermik has said, India also feels that the ownership lies with the regional stakeholders. Like, for instance, when Iran has been patting the back of Hamas to get it, to let it go full ahead, but when the war actually happens, it backs down, right? And the situation becomes very grave, where 30,000 people are dead. You know, that kind of actions have to be taken into account by the regional players and the Muslim countries. Like, for instance, if Malaysia doesn't recognize Israel, then the Muslim countries in the region who have been closer to Israel, they should talk amongst themselves as to what should be the pragmatic policy of these countries should be towards Israel. I think that should be the answer of this question. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, please, if you may, I mean, we're running out of time. We're mindful of time constraints, so we'll forge ahead with the parts where we're going to answer the question. Please. On Sultan's question, yeah. Our student.
I don't know if I will answer to questions that were not raised or unanswer questions that were raised. I'll try my best, excuse me for that. Whether it is a regional effort, regionally based here for the Gulf, we have always maintained that we have to be an active member in this community that tries to find solutions to issues. And we have been quite active, and you know that, Dr. Khalifa, in prodding others within our greater group, which is the Arab group and whatnot, to find answers to solutions. And we try to maintain that kind of active role. But we look at others that are strong, those who have inroads. And I mentioned India as an example because, don't forget, nowadays a lot has to do with perceptions. How do countries or the region perceive of what you are doing. Maybe you're doing things in a very quiet diplomacy, but if I don't see you doing something, I'll have a big question mark. If I don't see you cutting or limiting relationship with Israel during these times, I'll have a question mark. If I see you withholding monies from Anwar, I'll also have a question mark. Perceptions have to do a lot, especially given the kind of media that we have nowadays. So perceptions matter. And you'll have to do that to reach across, not only to this region, to reach to the people inside, to Gazans, to the people in the occupied territories, because these are the people whose morale has to be bolstered, to know that they are not alone in this world fighting for their own livelihood, for their own nationhood. You know, but here we come again to the question of working as blocks. I think interblocks will also work a lot if we can cooperate together. I have no problem when you said, you know, the mediation role of Kuwait. I'm not an official, so, yeah, but I would say that. I wouldn't mind if the Emirates talks on my behalf in another fora, because I have trust in you. I trust my own region, my own brethren in the GCC. I don't have to be there, but I put my trust in you. I put my trust in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Oman. I don't have to vie for a position there. If they can do it on their own, good for them. If they need my help, I'll come and do that. So I think this is my belief in that we are in this world together. I don't have to go as a block. Yani, okay, fine. That makes a perception of the Gulf being together. Not necessarily. If they can do it, go ahead and do it. And what you have mentioned about certain aspects here, I'll turn to you. You know, I have one major idea that I did not try on anyone. I'll try it on you in the midst of this public eye. What if countries that are known to be spoilers in our midst, in our region, the immediate peninsula and the Levant, retract their influence and go back within their own territory? What if Israel retracts and goes back to internationally recognized boundaries? Because I don't think anyone knows where their boundaries of Israel are now. Are they in the Golan? Aha, that's what Trump said. Take the Golan, halalik, you know. And withdraw from the occupied territories. Go to your borders of 1948. Let Iran also retract. Retract your forces. Don't empower others. The Houthis, or Hamas, as some would say, or Hezbollah. Let each country go to your own country and live in peace with your own people. Try to develop your own society. Ufukuna, you know? And this is what I think this will be a way for us to know what peace is. If you have your tentacles reaching across on the occupied territories and whatnot, and you dictate to me what has to be done, no. And Tawin, you know, tell me, the United Nations recognizes countries that peace-loving and I don't know what and things. And I think maybe it has to identify the country with the borders. Now let them ask Israel for their borders. Where are their borders? I don't think that will qualify them as a sovereign state. They'll have to draw their borders back to 1948. And we have to work at that. Let's work for solutions like these, you know, because I think we're suffering a lot in our region. And excuse me if I'm a little bit blunt. I left the service, so these views do not reflect those of my government. Thank you.
Thank you. Your Excellency.
So, Ambassador Mulla asked me this question about spoiler countries, and I guess this is very natural because I come from Serbia, so it's a logical thing for a Serbian to be asked about spoiler countries. you know your region far better than I, and you know than I ever would or will. You know the historical relations. You know the rules far better than I ever will. So I'll try and answer your question by sharing with you the experience from my part of the world, which I know far better, and Niki's from our part of the world, from the Balkans, right? So he would know what I say. In the Balkans, we have always had the intertwine of power relationship between the three centers of power, basically, from the west, from the east, and from the southeast, right? And, you know, those three centers of powers changed their name and changed their system of governance. And at some point there was, you know, Austro-Hungarian Empire was playing the role of the Western influence in the Balkans, and the Russian Empire was playing the role of the Eastern influence in the Balkans, and then the Soviet Union, and then, you know, other incarnations of the same thing, right? Essentially, culturally and geopolitically, the same thing. And then, of course, the Ottoman Empire, and which is no more, and so on and so forth. And often I was asked questions about, what it will take to end the, say, Russian malign influence in the Balkans. So I said, well, malign or not malign, we can debate, right? But I don't think that you can, after 400 or 500 years of influence of East, West, and the Southeast, let's say Europe, Russia, and Turkey in the Balkans, I don't think that you can exclude any of the three after a good few hundred years of interplay of their power relationship. So there's no way to push them out back into their borders and so on and so forth. And I don't know if the same thing applies to here. You know better your region than I do. But I think that we need to be right now perhaps a bit more of realists, because the dangers that are in front of us right now are existential. For the Palestinians, it's obvious that they're existential. But then again, I'd like to emphasize, I think it is going to become existential for the whole region, if not for the whole world, if we stick to the no solution policy, which I started off with in my remarks today. So can Iran retract to its borders and not exercise influence to the proxies and the like? I don't know. I wouldn't bet my money on it. Can others? I don't know. In the Balkans, I know they never will, or not in my lifetime. So I think that we need to take this into our equation as we try to solve the multi-body equation problem in the Middle East, starting off with the end of the tragedy for the Palestinian people, which, as I said, can extend into being the tragedy of us all, and before we may hope for, we may think it will happen.
Your Excellency. Well, I mean, once again, you know, the discussion, you know, can drag on. I mean, it can far exceed, and it will far exceed the bandwidth of this, you know, these confines. But you know, on behalf of the management, on behalf of His Excellency, on behalf of you know, everyone here at ACDA, I'd like to thank you, extend our thanks, heartfelt thanks for your participation, for your kind time, and we hope to see you taking part in future events very soon. Thank you.
خالد هلا حبيبي من خالد وي يا حبيبي يا عيوني ليش تأخرت؟ كان ينطرك